Hey there. Tonight, we look past the gunfights. We turn our gaze away from the heroic marshals and the daring outlaws, because for the vast majority of people who went west, the greatest dangers they faced didn't come from the barrel of a gun. The true enemies of the frontier were often silent, invisible, and far more relentless. We're going to explore how ordinary settlers, the farmers, the miners, the families in dusty towns and isolated cabins, survived the three great horsemen of their apocalypse: plague, famine, and robbery. This isn't a story of dramatic showdowns, but one of quiet, desperate endurance. It's a story of battling cholera with folk remedies, of facing down a plague of locusts that blotted out the sun, and of the gnawing fear that came with the knock of a stranger on the door of an isolated homestead. This is the real story of survival in the West. It wasn't about who was fastest with a gun, but about who was strong enough to survive a winter on spoiled food, knowledgeable enough to find clean water, and lucky enough to avoid the diseases that swept through the land like wildfire. If this kind of slow, detailed, and unromanticized history helps you find a place of rest, I would be grateful if you'd like the video and subscribed. It helps more than you know. And as always, I'm curious to see where our story is reaching. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Now, let the noise of your own time fade away. Settle into the comfort and safety of your room. Take a deep breath of clean air. You will come to appreciate it. Let's journey back to a time when survival was a daily, uncertain struggle against forces far greater than any single man. A world without germ theory. Before we can understand the immense challenge of disease on the frontier, we must first accept a fundamental, world-altering truth. You have no idea what makes you sick. The very concept of germs, of microscopic bacteria and viruses invading your body is a piece of science fiction, a bizarre and unbelievable fantasy. It does not exist in your world. You live in a world governed by the miasma theory of disease. It is the dominant medical understanding of your time. You believe, and your doctor believes, that sickness is caused by miasma, which literally means bad air. This bad air is thought to rise from any source of decay or filth, from swamps, from rotting garbage, from manure piles, from the stench of the slaughterhouse, and from the bodies of the unwashed or the dead. You believe that you get sick by inhaling this foul-smelling air. The smell itself is the vehicle of the disease. This theory, while incorrect in its mechanism, leads you to some accidentally correct conclusions. You instinctively know that the stinking, garbage-filled alley behind the saloon is an unhealthy place. You understand that the swamp at the edge of town is a place of fever. You are right that these places are dangerous, but you do not know why. You blame the odor, not the mosquito breeding in the swamp water, or the bacteria flourishing in the filth. Your attempts to prevent disease are based entirely on this misunderstanding. To purify the air during an epidemic, the town authorities might burn large bonfires of tar or sulfur in the streets, hoping that the stronger, cleaner smell will drive away the miasma. In your home, your wife might place a cut onion in the corner of a room, believing it will absorb the bad air. When you have to go into a sick room or a crowded, smelly area, you might hold a handkerchief soaked in vinegar or perfume over your nose and mouth, a desperate and useless filter against the invisible enemy. You also believe that disease can be caused by an imbalance in your body's four humours, an ancient theory passed down from the Greeks. These humours are blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If you are sick, your doctor believes it is because you have too much or too little of one of these substances. His cures, as we will see, will be designed to violently purge your body to restore this imagined balance. And finally, you believe that disease can be a matter of morality or divine will. A sudden illness might be a punishment from God for a sin you have committed. An epidemic sweeping through town might be a judgment on the community's wicked ways. This adds a layer of shame and fear to sickness. It is not just a physical ailment. It could be a sign of your own moral failing. This lack of understanding has profound and deadly consequences. It means you have no concept of contagion in the way we do. You might know that smallpox is catching, but you don't know why. You don't understand that the simple act of shaking hands with someone, of sharing a drinking cup, or of a fly landing on your food can transmit a fatal illness. You do not wash your hands before eating. Your doctor does not wash his hands before delivering a baby or performing surgery. You drink water from a well that is just a few feet away from the pit of human waste that is your outhouse, never suspecting the invisible connection between the two. You are living in a world where the greatest threat to your life is an enemy you cannot see, you do not understand, and against which you have almost no effective defense. You are walking through a minefield of microbes, completely blindfolded, guided only by folk wisdom, superstition, and the profoundly flawed medical science of your time. This is the stage upon which the great tragedies of frontier health will play out. Cholera and typhoid, the waterborne terrors. Of all the diseases that haunted the frontier, none were more feared than the great epidemic diseases that spread through contaminated water, cholera, and typhoid fever. These were the diseases of the trail, the boomtown, and the railroad camp. They were swift, brutal, and capable of wiping out a significant portion of a community in a matter of weeks. Imagine you are living in a bustling frontier town in the heat of summer. The town has grown quickly, a chaotic collection of wooden buildings with no planning for sanitation. The water for the town comes from a few shallow wells or directly from the river that runs past the edge of town. This is the same river into which the town's waste is dumped. One day, a new arrival, perhaps a traveller from a steamboat downriver, comes to town. He is not feeling well. He uses the privy behind the hotel. The contents of that privy, teeming with cholera bacteria, will seep through the soil into the town's water table, contaminating the wells. The invisible plague has been sown. A few days later, you wake up feeling fine. You have your breakfast, drink your coffee made with water from the town well, and go about your day. By midday, you feel a sudden, strange churning in your stomach. Then come the cramps, a violent twisting in your gut. This is followed by an explosive, watery diarrhea. It is not normal diarrhea. It is profuse, relentless, and has a distinctive appearance like rice water. Soon after, the vomiting begins, equally violent and uncontrollable. This is Asiatic cholera. The bacteria are causing your intestines to shed massive amounts of fluid. Your body is draining itself. The dehydration is shockingly rapid. You become incredibly thirsty, but any water you drink comes right back up. Your skin becomes cold and clammy, losing its elasticity. If you pinch the skin on the back of your hand, it stays tented. Your eyes sink back into their sockets. Your face becomes gaunt and bluish, a condition known as cholera face. Your voice becomes a hoarse whisper. The muscle cramps are excruciating as your body loses essential salts and electrolytes. Your mind, however, often remains terrifyingly clear. You are fully aware of your body shutting down. Your family is terrified. They call for the doctor. He arrives, smells the miasma of sickness in the room, and begins his treatment. Believing your body needs to be purged of the cholera poison, he may give you a powerful emetic, like tartar emetic, to make you vomit even more. Or he might give you a dose of calomel, a mercury-based laxative, which only worsens the diarrhea. He might try to bleed you, taking out a pint of your blood to cool your system, which only accelerates your dehydration and shock. His every action, though well-intentioned, is precisely the opposite of what your body needs. He is in essence helping the disease to kill you. From the first symptoms to the final, quiet end, it can be less than 24 hours. You die from hypovolemic shock, your body simply having lost too much fluid to sustain life. An epidemic spreads through the town like fire. One case becomes 5 become 50, panic sets in. People know that the disease is spreading, but they don't know how. They blame the bad air, the spoiled food, a recent comet. Some will flee the town, unknowingly carrying the disease with them to the next settlement down the road. The town becomes a place of death and fear. The sound of the carpenter hammering together rough pine coffins is a constant presence. Mass graves are dug on the edge of town. Typhoid fever was another waterborne scourge, though it was a slower, more insidious killer. Also spread by contaminated food and water, its onset was more gradual. It would begin with a slowly rising fever, a headache, and a general feeling of malaise. Over a period of weeks, the fever would become high and sustained. You would develop a rash on your abdomen, the rose spots characteristic of the disease. You would become weak, delirious, and often suffer from intestinal hemorrhage or perforation, a tear in the bowel wall that led to fatal peritonitis. An illness with typhoid could last for a month or more, a long, draining ordeal that left survivors weak and emaciated for months afterward. Abraham Lincoln's own son, Willie, died of typhoid fever in the White House in 1862. For the settler on the frontier, these diseases were a constant, terrifying possibility. Every drink of water from an unknown source, every meal in a new town, was a gamble. You didn't know it. But you were constantly threatened by an invisible world of bacteria, a world that thrived in the very water you needed to survive. Smallpox, diphtheria, and consumption, the killers in the air, while the waterborne plagues of cholera and typhoid haunted the well, the creek, and the communal cup. Another legion of deadly diseases travelled by a far more insidious and inescapable medium, the very air people breathed. They rode on the fine spray of a cough, the moisture of a shared word, or lingered on the skin of a casual acquaintance. These were diseases that could strike anywhere, from the most crowded, filthy town to the most isolated, windswept homestead. They respected no boundaries and required no single contaminated source to spread like wildfire. And they were particularly cruelly devastating to children, turning the family home from a sanctuary into a death trap. Let's first consider smallpox, a disease whose name alone inspired a unique and primal terror. In the modern world, it is a vanquished foe, a success story of global vaccination that has relegated it to a historical curiosity. In the 19th century, it was one of the most feared plagues on Earth, a recurring scourge that left a trail of death, disfigurement, and blindness in its wake. It was highly contagious, spreading with terrifying efficiency through respiratory droplets expelled by an infected person or by direct contact with the fluid from the characteristic blisters. Even touching the bedding or clothing of a victim could be enough to contract the disease. The disease began insidiously, with a high fever, a splitting headache, and severe body aches that felt as if one's bones were breaking. Then, after a few days of this misery, came the rash. It started as small red spots on the face and hands, which then spread to cover the entire body. But these were not simple spots. Over the next week, they would evolve with horrifying deliberation. They would develop into large, hard, fluid-filled pustules that covered every inch of skin, including the palms of the hands, the soles of the feet, and, most agonizingly, the inside of the mouth, throat, and even the eyes. The pain was immense, a constant torment of burning and itching. The victim was transformed into a grotesque, unrecognizable figure, their features swollen and obliterated by the pustular tide. The mortality rate hovered around 30%, but death was often a release from unimaginable suffering. For those who survived, the ordeal was far from over. As the pustules finally dried and scabbed over, they would fall off to reveal deep, pitted scars, known as pockmarks, that would permanently disfigure the survivor's face and body. In an age without reconstructive surgery, these scars were a lifelong brand, a visible testament to the disease they had endured. Many survivors were also left blind, the pustules having destroyed their corneas. A form of vaccination, using the less virulent cowpox virus, had been developed by the English physician Edward Jenner in the late 18th century. This was a medical miracle, the first true victory over a major infectious disease. But on the American frontier, access to the vaccine was limited, inconsistent, and often met with suspicion. The vaccine material lymph fluid taken from a cowpox blister was difficult to transport and preserve without refrigeration. Its potency was often lost on the long journey west. As a result, many people, particularly those in remote areas, were completely unprotected. When an outbreak of smallpox occurred in a frontier community, it was a terrifying event that shattered the social fabric. The community might try to enforce a crude quarantine, posting a guard, often a man with a shotgun, outside the house of the afflicted and forbidding anyone from entering or leaving. A yellow flag or a piece of yellow cloth would be nailed to the door as a grim warning. But these measures were often taken too late. The disease, with its long incubation period, would have already spread silently through the community. Fear and suspicion would run rampant. Neighbours would shun neighbours. The mail would stop. The town would effectively shut down, its inhabitants waiting in terror to see who would fall sick next. For Native American populations who had no prior exposure and thus no natural or inherited immunity to the virus, the arrival of smallpox was nothing short of apocalyptic. It was a virgin soil epidemic, and it burned through entire tribes with a speed and lethality that is difficult to comprehend. Mortality rates could exceed 90%. Entire villages were wiped out, leaving only a few traumatized survivors to tell the tale. It was a biological weapon that, intentionally or not, played a significant role in the conquest of the continent, depopulating vast areas far more effectively than any army could. Then there was diphtheria, a disease that was particularly cruel in its near-exclusive targeting of children. It was a bacterial infection that spread through coughing and sneezing, seeming at first to be nothing more than a simple childhood sore throat. But it was far more sinister. The bacteria, Corynebacterium diphtheriae, would produce a powerful toxin that caused a thick, grey, leathery membrane to grow over the tonsils, the pharynx, and the larynx. As this foul, dead tissue grew, it would slowly and inexorably obstruct the child's airway. The infected child would struggle for every single breath, their breathing becoming a high-pitched, rasping sound known as stridor, a sound that once heard would haunt a parent's nightmares forever. They would sit up in bed, their eyes wide with terror, their small bodies straining, their lips turning blue from lack of oxygen. They would die slowly, over a period of days, from suffocation. Because of this horrific, drawn-out death, diphtheria was known as the strangling angel of children. Parents could do nothing but watch in helpless, impotent horror as their child suffocated to death in their own bed. A doctor might be called, but he was equally helpless. He might try to swab the throat, but this often only caused bleeding and made the membrane grow back faster. In the most desperate cases, he might attempt a tracheotomy with a simple knife, a brutal and usually fatal procedure on a conscious, terrified child. There was no effective cure. The diphtheria antitoxin and vaccine, which would virtually eliminate this terror, would not be developed until the very end of the 19th century. And finally, there was the great chronic killer of the era, a disease whose presence was a constant, quiet and persistent hum beneath the louder alarms of the acute plagues: tuberculosis. Unlike the swift, dramatic onslaught of cholera or smallpox, tuberculosis, or consumption, as it was commonly and chillingly known, was a slow, wasting disease. It was a bacterial infection of the lungs caused by Mycobacterium tuberculosis that spread through the air when an infected person coughed, sneezed, or even spoke. You would develop a persistent, hacking cough, a low-grade fever that left you feeling perpetually unwell, drenching night sweats that soaked your sheets, and a profound, bone-deep fatigue that no amount of rest could cure. Over a period of months, or, more often, years, you would slowly waste away. The disease, true to its name, would consume you from the inside out. You would grow thinner and weaker, your eyes appearing large and luminous in a gaunt, pale face. In the final stages, you would begin coughing up blood as the bacteria destroyed your lung tissue. Consumption was everywhere. It was an endemic disease that thrived in the crowded, poorly ventilated conditions of frontier cabins, mining camp, bunkhouses, and town tenements. It was romanticized in the literature and opera of the time as a disease of sensitive, artistic souls, lending its victims a tragic, ethereal beauty. The reality was a slow, undignified, and inexorable decline into infirmity and death. There was no cure. The only prescribed treatment, for those who could afford it, was a change of scenery. It was widely believed that moving to a high, dry climate could slow the progression of the disease. This belief is why so many sanatoriums, specialized hospitals for consumptives, sprang up in the West, in places like Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The West became a destination for lungers who came seeking a cure in the clean, dry air, but for most people this was not an option. They simply wasted away in their homes, slowly, chronically, their presence a constant, coughing reminder of mortality in the family. They became a burden on their families, unable to work, requiring constant care, their slow decline a source of both grief and immense strain. These airborne diseases were a part of the very fabric of 19th century life. The sound of a child struggling for breath with diphtheria, the sight of a person's face permanently scarred by smallpox, the sound of a family member's chronic, racking, bloody cough. These were the common, tragic realities of a world that had not yet learned how to fight the invisible enemies that filled the very air it breathed. They were a constant presence, a source of fear and grief that shaped family life, community interactions, and the fundamental human experience of the era. The doctor's cure, a gamble with death. You are sick. It began as a simple cough, a tickle in your throat, but it has now descended deep into your chest, taking root with a malevolent grip. A fever rages, leaving you alternating between shivering fits that rattle your teeth and waves of sweat that soak your bedding. Every breath is a painful, shallow gasp, and each cough brings a deep, tearing ache to your ribs. Your family, their faces etched with a growing fear, has tried all the home remedies they know. They have forced you to drink bitter herbal teas brewed from yarrow and boneset. They have applied hot, stinking poultices of mustard and onion to your chest, hoping to draw out the sickness. Your mother has whispered various folk charms and prayers, her faith a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. But nothing has worked. You are getting weaker, the world receding into a blurry, feverish haze. In desperation, they send for the doctor. His arrival, after a long and anxious wait, is a moment of both profound hope and unacknowledged, mortal danger. The cures he offers are based on a deeply flawed and ancient understanding of the human body, and they are often far more dangerous than the disease they are meant to treat. The doctor, a man named Harris, finally arrives, his horse lathered from the long ride. He enters your small, dim cabin, bringing with him the smell of the cold outdoors and his worn leather bag. He does not wash his hands. The concept of hand washing as a medical necessity is a strange, foreign idea, years away from acceptance. He sits by your bedside, his expression one of grave professionalism, and begins his examination. He might look at your tongue, noting its color and coating. He will take your pulse, not just counting the beats, but assessing its quality, whether it feels strong or weak, thready or bounding. He will ask your family about your symptoms, listening intently to their descriptions of your fever and cough. His diagnosis will not be based on an understanding of viruses or bacteria, but on the ancient theory of humorism, a medical doctrine inherited from the Greek physician Galen that has dominated Western medicine for over 500 years. He believes the body is governed by 4 essential fluids, or humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health is the result of these humours being in perfect balance. Sickness, therefore, is caused by an imbalance, an excess or deficiency of one of these fluids. He will likely conclude that your sickness, this pneumonia, is caused by an excess of blood, a plethora, which is causing your fever and the inflammation in your lungs. His primary course of treatment, therefore, is logical and direct. He must remove the excess blood. From his bag, he takes out a small, polished wooden case. Inside, nestled in velvet, are his lancets. He selects a small, sharp blade, wiping it clean on his waistcoat. He ties a strip of cloth tightly around your upper arm. As he searches for a vein, He might explain to your anxious family that the blood is congested in your lungs and that by opening a channel, he can relieve the pressure and allow the body to restore its natural equilibrium. He finds a prominent vein at the crook of your elbow and, with a quick, practiced motion, makes an incision. Your blood, dark in the dim light, wells up and begins to flow into a tin bowl held by your mother. The doctor watches the stream intently, judging its color and consistency, looking for signs of the disease. He might drain a pint or more, continuing until you feel faint and the world begins to swim before your eyes. In your already weakened, feverish state, this sudden loss of blood is a terrible shock to your system. It drastically lowers your blood pressure, impairs your body's ability to carry oxygen to its tissues, and cripples your already struggling immune system. Yet, the doctor sees your lightheadedness as a positive sign that the treatment is working, that the pressure has been relieved. This practice, known as phlebotomy or bloodletting, was the most common medical procedure of the era. It is believed to have contributed to the death of George Washington, whose doctors bled him of a massive amount of blood by some estimates, nearly half his body's supply in a single day, in a futile attempt to treat a severe throat infection. If bloodletting is not enough, the doctor might turn to another common treatment, blistering. He would apply a caustic plaster, often made from the crushed, dried bodies of the Cantharis beetle, commonly known as Spanish fly, to your skin, usually on your chest or back. The active chemical, cantharidin, is a powerful irritant. Over the next few hours, the plaster would create a large, painful, fluid-filled blister, sometimes the size of the palm of your hand. The theory was that the blister acted as a counter-irritant, drawing the poisons or the bad humours of the disease out from the deeper organs and concentrating them in the fluid of the blister. This fluid could then be drained, supposedly removing the sickness from your body. In reality, it was simply a painful and useless procedure that added a significant chemical burn to the suffering of your illness. It created an open wound that could, and often did, become infected itself, adding a new, secondary battle for your body to fight. But the doctor's most common and most trusted tools were the powerful and toxic drugs he carried in his bag. These were known as heroic medicines, so called because they produced a dramatic, violent, and undeniable reaction in the body. In an age without laboratory tests or imaging, this visible, physical reaction was seen as proof that the medicine was powerful and that it was working, that it was waging a heroic battle against the disease. The two most common of these heroic drugs were calomel and halop. Calomel was mercurous chloride, a compound of the heavy metal mercury. It was a powerful purgative, and when administered, it caused massive, explosive, and debilitating diarrhea. Doctors would prescribe huge doses of it for almost any ailment, from fever and pneumonia to constipation and teething in infants. The patient would be violently ill for days, their body racked with cramps as it desperately tried to expel the poison. The doctor would see this as a success, a sign that the body was being cleansed of the disease. In reality, the patient was being actively poisoned with mercury. The short-term effects were agonizing, but the long-term effects were even worse. Chronic use of calomel led to mercury poisoning, which caused a host of horrific symptoms: a constant metallic taste in the mouth, excessive salivation and drooling, neurological damage causing tremors, the hatter's shakes, and the loosening and eventual loss of teeth as the gums rotted away. It was a brutal, destructive substance, yet it was the most widely prescribed drug of the 19th century. Halop, derived from the root of a Mexican plant, was a similarly powerful cathartic, another drug designed to violently purge the bowels. Often, the doctor would prescribe calomel and jalap together, a 1-2 punch, designed to assault the body from both ends. This violent purging would leave the patient profoundly dehydrated and weak, depleting their body of essential electrolytes and further compromising their ability to recover from the actual disease they were suffering from. Other drugs in the doctor's arsenal included tartar emetic, antimony potassium tartrate, a metallic compound used to induce violent vomiting, and strychnine, a deadly poison used in tiny, carefully measured doses as a stimulant for the heart and nervous system. And then there was laudanum. Laudanum, a simple tincture of opium dissolved in alcohol, was the miracle drug of the age. It was used as a painkiller, a cough suppressant, a sedative, and a cure for diarrhea. It was prescribed for everything from a toothache to cancer pain, from a cough to a fussy baby. It was incredibly effective at dulling pain and inducing a peaceful, dreamlike sleep, but it was also highly addictive. Many people on the frontier, particularly women suffering from chronic ailments, nervous conditions, or the immense psychological stress of their hard lives, became unwitting opium addicts through their regular use of patent medicines and doctors' prescriptions containing laudanum. It was a quiet, hidden epidemic, a source of immense private suffering. If you had a physical wound instead of an illness, the doctor's treatment could be equally bizarre and dangerous. He might pack a deep wound with lint scraped from old linen, or apply a poultice of bread and milk, or even fresh cow manure, believing these substances had drawing properties that would pull the inflammation out of the wound. These treatments would, of course, introduce a host of new and dangerous bacteria, like Clostridium tetani, the cause of tetanus, directly into the injured tissue. The frontier doctor was not, for the most part, a charlatan or a sadist. He was a product of his time, using the best medical knowledge that was available to him. He was often a dedicated and compassionate man, travelling long distances in terrible weather on horseback to treat the sick and injured. He faced immense challenges with limited resources, but the tools and theories he had to work with were profoundly, lethally flawed. His education was based on centuries of misinformation. To be treated by a 19th century doctor was to submit your body to a form of well-intentioned but often destructive guesswork. It was a gamble with death, where the odds were often stacked against you by the very person trying to save you. In many cases, the patient who refused the doctor's heroic treatments and was left alone with only bed rest, simple hydration, and the body's own remarkable ability to heal, had a far better chance of survival. The homesteader's gamble, a war with the land. Beyond the invisible, microscopic world of germs and the immediate, explosive violence of the gunfight, the great, defining struggle for hundreds of thousands of American settlers was a daily, grinding, and often losing war against the land itself. The promise, codified in the Homestead Act of 1862, was one of the most seductive in the nation's history. 160 acres of your own land, a chance to escape the wage labor of the industrial East, to be your own master, to build a future for your children literally from the soil up. This promise was amplified and broadcast by a sophisticated propaganda machine. The posters and pamphlets distributed back east by land speculators and railroad companies eager to sell tickets and inflate the value of their vast land grants painted a picture of a verdant, well-watered paradise. They called the Great Plains a New Eden, the garden of the world, where bountiful crops sprang from the deep, black, fertile earth with minimal effort. This was, for most of the vast territory west of the 100th meridian, a catastrophic and cruel lie. Imagine you are that homesteader. The year is 1878. With your spouse and 2 small children, you have sold everything you owned back in Ohio, the small family farm that could no longer compete, the tools, the furniture to afford the long journey and the basic equipment for a new life. You have your sturdy wagon, a team of weary but strong oxen, a precious, heavy-duty braking plough, a few essential tools, and a heart full of a fragile, government-sponsored hope. After weeks of travel, you arrive in western Kansas to find your designated plot of land, marked on a map at the land office. The first thing that strikes you is not the beauty or the richness of the soil, but the sheer overwhelming emptiness. There are no trees. Not one. There is only an endless, rolling sea of grass that sways and whispers under a sky so vast and empty it seems to press down on you, a physical weight on your soul. This is your Eden. Your first task, before you can even think of planting, is to build a home. The iconic log cabin of American law is an impossibility here. With no wood for lumber, you must turn to the only building material available in limitless supply, the earth itself. You will build a sod house, an act of sheer, desperate ingenuity that will define your existence for years to come. The work is brutal, unlike any you have ever known. You yoke your oxen to your special breaking plough, a heavy, sharp instrument designed with a rolling coulter to slice through the thick, tangled mat of prairie grass roots that have been growing, undisturbed, for 1,000 years. Guiding the plough is a battle, as it bucks and screeches through the dense sod. You carve the prairie into long, uniform strips, which are then cut with a spade into rectangular bricks, roughly 2 feet long and a foot wide. Each of these Nebraska marbles, as they were wryly called, weighs 50 pounds or more, heavy with the dampness of the deep soil and held together by a dense web of fibrous roots. You lift them, one by one, your muscles screaming in protest, and lay them grass side down, in overlapping courses like giant, earthy building blocks. The walls of your home rise slowly, 2 to 3 feet thick. For the roof, you might make a multi-day journey to the nearest creek bed to cut down a few precious cottonwood poles, which you lay across the top of the walls. Over this weak framework, you place a layer of thick prairie hay, followed by another layer of sod bricks, this time placed grass side up, in the futile hope that the roots will continue to grow and form a living, waterproof seal. The floor is simply the packed earth you started with. The windows, if you can afford the luxury of glass panes brought from the east, are kept small to maintain structural integrity. More likely, they are just openings covered with greased paper or a piece of stretched muslin, letting in a dim, murky, subaquatic light. Your new home is, in effect, a man-made cave. It is dark, damp, and claustrophobic. The thick earthen walls do provide excellent insulation, making it surprisingly cool in the blistering 110-degree heat of summer and warmer than a drafty wooden cabin in the depths of a winter blizzard. But its flaws are profound and constant. When it rains, the sod roof doesn't just leak, it absorbs the water like a giant sponge and continues to drip a slow, miserable, muddy ooze for days after the storm has passed. Your bedding is perpetually damp. A fine layer of dirt, debris, and insect droppings constantly flakes from the sod ceiling into your food, your water, and your hair. The earthen walls are a haven for the prairie's less welcome inhabitants. Spiders, centipedes, mice, and, most terrifyingly, snakes find the cool, dark crevices of your home to be ideal nesting places. You might wake up in the morning to find a 6-foot-long bull snake coiled in the corner of your one-room home, a silent, unnerving roommate. Life in the soddy is a constant battle against filth, dampness, and vermin. Now you must improve the land to fulfill the terms of the Homestead Act. This means breaking the virgin prairie sod for farming, an undertaking that makes building the soddy seem like a light chore. This is not like ploughing a field back east. The prairie sod is an incredibly tough, dense, and ancient network of roots. It takes a team of 4, sometimes 6, strong oxen, straining against their yokes until their sides heave, to pull the heavy breaking plough through the soil. The sound of the roots tearing is like the sound of ripping fabric, a constant, grating protest from the land. The work is so physically demanding that it often breaks the ploughs, the animals, and the men who guide them. A man might spend an entire season, from the spring thaw to the first frost, engaged in this relentless, back-breaking labour, only to have broken a mere 10 or 15 acres, a tiny black patch in an ocean of grass, just enough to plant a small experimental crop of sod corn. And then you face the true capricious sovereign of the Great Plains, the climate. The railroad promoters had peddled the fraudulent slogan, "Rain follows the plough," a dangerous pseudo-scientific theory that claimed the very act of farming the moisture from the ploughed soil and the transpiration from the crops would increase the local rainfall. This lie lured thousands to their ruin. The defining feature of the region is not its fertility, but its extreme environmental volatility and its cyclical, devastating droughts. You might be lucky and arrive during a wet cycle. The first few years your crops might thrive, giving you a false, intoxicating sense of hope and luring more settlers in with letters written back home. But these wet years are inevitably, inexorably followed by long, brutal droughts that can last for years. Imagine watching the sky every day for months, a merciless, cloudless, metallic blue. The sun beats down with a physical force. The tender green shoots of your corn, representing your family's entire food supply for the coming year, turn a sickly yellow, then a brittle brown, then wither into dust. The rich earth of your fields, once dark and promising, turns to a pale, cracked powder. The wind, the constant, nerve-shredding, howling wind of the plains, picks up this powderized topsoil and creates dusters, great, dark, rolling clouds of your farm that blot out the sun and fill the air with a choking, inescapable grit. It gets into your food, your water, your lungs. It buries your fences and drifts against your soddy like black snow. You watch your hopes, your dreams, your entire year's labor literally turn to dust and blow away to the next county. Your well, which you dug 30 feet deep by hand, goes dry. The isolation is a form of psychological torture that is difficult to comprehend in the modern world. Your nearest neighbor might be several miles away, their soddy a distant, low smudge on the horizon. You might go for weeks, or even entire months, without seeing another human being outside of your immediate family. This was especially hard on the women. Many had come from close-knit communities back east, with a rich social fabric of sisters, mothers, friends, and church gatherings. Now, they were utterly alone in a vast, silent, and intimidating landscape. The only sound for days on end would be the howling of the wind, a sound that countless pioneer diaries describe as maddening, a relentless assault on the sanity. This profound loneliness, combined with the constant physical hardship, the repeated crop failures, the fear of prairie fires or blizzards, and the sheer, soul-crushing monotony of the landscape, led to a condition that became known as prairie madness. It was a deep, debilitating depression that manifested in weeping fits, listlessness, and complete withdrawal. It led many to abandon their homesteads, their soddies left to crumble back into the earth. For some, it led to taking their own lives, the only escape from a world that had become an open-air prison. The dream of the independent yeoman farmer, of a nation of self-sufficient landowners, was a powerful and foundational American idea. But for thousands upon thousands of homesteaders, the reality was a losing battle against forces they could not control. They were not defeated by a lack of hard work, courage, or moral fiber. They poured their bodies and souls into the unforgiving soil. They were defeated by an environment that was simply not suited to the kind of small-scale, water-intensive farming they had been promised. They were the victims of a national fantasy, lured into a war with the land that they had no chance of winning. The living storm and the starving winter, as if the cyclical droughts, the soul-baking heat, the terrifying blizzards, and the profound, mind-breaking isolation were not enough of a trial. The settlers of the Great Plains in the 1870s had to face another, almost biblical plague. This was a foe that could not be fought with a plough or a rifle, a force of nature so vast and so alien that it seemed to mock the very idea of human endeavour. These were not just a few pesky insects hopping in the summer grass. They were the Rocky Mountain locust, Melanoplus spretus, a species now extinct, that gathered in swarms of a scale that utterly defies modern imagination. It was a living, breathing, all-consuming storm of hunger, a mobile, biological cataclysm that could erase a year of back-breaking labour in a single afternoon. The plague of grasshoppers, a living storm. Imagine you are that homesteader, a man named Thomas, and it is a hot, clear day in the middle of a Kansas summer in the year 1874. It has been a hard year, but not a hopeless one. The spring was wet, and your corn crop, against all odds, has survived a recent dry spell. The stalks stand shoulder high, their broad green leaves rustling in the ceaseless prairie wind, the ears plump and full of milky promise. Your wife, Sarah, has managed a small vegetable garden near the soddy, coaxing squash and beans from the tough soil. For the first time in a long while, you feel a flicker of hope, a dangerous luxury in this land. You look at your fields and see not just food, but survival. You see the mortgage payment on the plough, you see new boots for the children, you see a future. Then you notice it, a strange, dark cloud on the western horizon. It is not a thunderhead. The sky is a perfect, cloudless blue. This cloud is too low, too sharp-edged, and it seems to shimmer with an unnatural metallic light, like heat haze on a cosmic scale. You call for Sarah, and together you stand outside your sod house, a hand shielding your eyes against the glare. Then you hear it. It begins as a low, almost subliminal hum, a vibration you feel in your teeth and bones more than you hear with your ears. The hum grows steadily into a crackling, chattering roar, like a distant prairie fire or a great, rushing waterfall. The sound grows louder and louder, a sound that fills the entire world, blotting out the chirping of crickets and the cry of the meadowlark. The cloud on the horizon is not a cloud. It is a swarm of billions upon billions of locusts. The largest of these swarms, recorded by the physician and amateur entomologist Albert Child in 1875, was estimated to be over 800 miles long and 110 miles wide, a single, contiguous mass of life stretching from Canada to Texas, containing trillions of insects. It was, and remains, the largest gathering of animal life ever recorded on the planet, and it is heading directly for your farm. They arrive. The vanguard, a scattering of individual insects, begins to drop from the sky, hitting the dry ground with audible clicks. Then the front wall of the swarm hits. The sun is blotted out. The bright, hot midday sky turns a sickening brownish yellow, as if viewed through smoked glass. An eerie twilight descends. The air, once hot and still, is now a chaotic tempest of wings and bodies, a deafening, whirring, chattering roar that drowns out all other sound, making speech impossible. They descend upon your farm not like rain, but like a flood, a living, clicking, crawling tide. They are everywhere, covering everything in a thick, squirming, writhing carpet several inches deep. The ground moves. The walls of your soddy move. The world itself seems to be made of a single, horrifying, hungry organism. And they begin to eat. They eat with a terrifying, single-minded, machine-like voracity that is the stuff of nightmares. You watch in paralyzed horror as the swarm devours your cornfield. They land on the stalks, their combined weight making them bend and snap. They chew through the leaves, the tassels, the tender ears, stripping the stalks bare in a matter of minutes, leaving behind nothing but a field of chewed, splintered, naked sticks. They move on to Sarah's garden, the product of her tireless labor. The squash, the beans, the potatoes they consume, the leaves, the stems, the very roots in the ground. They eat the wild grass of the prairie until the ground is bare and black, as if scorched by fire. But they do not stop there. Their hunger is absolute, indiscriminate, a force that seeks to convert all organic matter into more of itself. They eat the leaves from the few precious cottonwood trees you planted by the creek, your only source of shade. They land on the backs of your live sheep, chewing the wool from their bodies, leaving the animals bleeding and terrified. They eat the leather harnesses of your oxen, the wooden handle of your axe, leaving it pitted and scarred as if by acid. They swarm over your sod house, eating the grass from the roof, exposing the dirt beneath to the elements. They crawl through every crack and crevice in your walls, under the door, filling your one-room home with their clicking, stinking, disgusting bodies. They fall down the chimney into the fire, creating a foul, acrid smoke, and they eat your clothes. A shirt Sarah left on a clothesline is devoured in moments, leaving only the metal buttons glinting on the ravaged ground. You are helpless. There is nothing you can do. You and Sarah might run into the fields, waving blankets and shouting until your throats are raw, but it is like trying to stop a tidal wave with a teacup. For every 1,000 you kill, 1,000,000 more take their place. You are overwhelmed, a tiny, powerless human in the face of a planetary force. The experience is not just one of agricultural loss, It is a form of profound psychological terror. It is an encounter with a force of nature so vast, so alien, and so utterly destructive that it feels like the end of the world, a divine punishment for your hubris in trying to tame this land. It is a moment of absolute, soul-crushing insignificance. The swarm might last for hours, or even for days, a relentless, waking nightmare. The sun remains a dim, bronze disk in a brown sky. The roar is unending. The world is reduced to a single, horrifying reality of crawling, chewing, stinking insects. And when it finally moves on, pushed by some collective instinct and the prevailing winds, it leaves behind a scene of utter, absolute desolation. The world, which was green and full of promise an hour ago, is now brown, black, and silent. The only sound is the sickening crunch of the bodies of the countless grasshoppers left behind under your feet. The ground is slick with their chewed tobacco-like spittle and droppings. Even the water in the well is fouled with their drowned bodies, turning it into an undrinkable, stinking soup that must be bailed out for days. For a homesteader like you, who has already endured so much, a locust plague was often the final, spirit-breaking blow. You had gambled everything on a single crop, and in the space of a single afternoon, it was gone. Everything. Many families simply gave up. They packed what little they had left their bedding, a few pots, their children into their wagons, scrawled a bitter sign on their abandoned claim that read, "In God we trusted, in Kansas we busted," and began the long, humiliating journey back east, defeated. The locust plagues of the 1870s were a brutal, stark reminder that in the war between the settler and the prairie had ancient and powerful weapons of its own. The starving winter, a diet of desperation. After the drought has withered your crops to dust, or the locusts have devoured them to the root, you face the ultimate trial, the great filter of frontier life, the starving winter. The locusts have passed, but their devastation remains. You have no harvest to store in your root cellar. Your small cash reserves, if you ever had any, are long gone, spent on seed and supplies. You are entering the harshest season of the year with almost nothing, facing the biting winds and deep snows of a plains winter with an empty larder and a hollow, aching stomach. Survival now depends not on the virtues of hard work or careful planning, but on raw ingenuity, animal endurance, and your ability to redefine the very meaning of the word food. The community, if there is one, pulls together at first. The bonds of shared hardship are strong in these isolated places. Those few families who, by some miracle of location or timing, perhaps they planted a late crop, or the swarm partially missed their claim, might have a small amount of food to spare, will share what they can. But they have their own children's mouths to feed, and their surplus is agonizingly small. A sack of potatoes, a few pounds of precious flour, is a gift of immense generosity, a lifeline, but it cannot last. The ethic of sharing is strong, but it cannot create food where there is none. As the weeks of autumn turn into the frozen months of winter, generosity gives way to a grim, quiet desperation. Visits between neighbors become less frequent. No one wants to see the hunger in another family's eyes when they have nothing left to give. So, you turn to the land, to the slim, desperate pickings of a frozen winter landscape. As the man of the family, you will hunt, day after day, tramping for miles through the deep snow in worn-out boots, your breath freezing in the frigid air. But the game animals, the deer, the pronghorn, the few remaining bison, are also suffering from the blighted landscape. They are scarce, wary, and thin, their own ribs showing through their winter coats. A successful hunt is a rare miracle, a cause for weeping celebration that brings the taste of meat into your home for the first time in months. More often you will hunt anything that moves. You will spend hours stalking rabbits, their white winter coats making them ghosts against the snow. You will set snares and traps along any trail, hoping to catch a single, precious source of protein to add to the watery broth that has become your family's daily meal. You will shoot prairie dogs and gophers, their meat stringy and tough, but meat nonetheless. You become a forager of the desolate. You and Sarah gather the seed heads of tumbleweeds, which other settlers have mockingly called prairie spinach, and you try to parch and grind the tiny gritty seeds into a coarse, unpalatable flour that you mix with snow to make a thin, tasteless gruel. You take your axe and spade and dig into the frozen ground for the tough, woody roots of the yucca or the wild sunflower, roots that in a normal year you would ignore as animal fodder. You boil them for hours and hours to make them even marginally edible, a stringy, tasteless mass that fills the belly and quiets the worst of the hunger pangs but offers little true nourishment. When the last of the scavenged food is gone, when the traps are empty and the land offers nothing more, you begin to eat the inedible. This is the true face of starvation, a descent into a primal state of existence. You strip the inner bark from the cottonwood trees along the frozen creek. It is slightly sweetish and can be chewed for hours to provide a tiny amount of nourishment, a trick learned from the native peoples. You take the leather boots you can no longer wear, the rawhide harnesses for your oxen, which themselves may have already starved or been eaten, and you boil them for hours and hours, scraping off the softened, gluey material to create a thin, gelatinous, foul-tasting broth from the collagen. It is a soup made of your own tools, a broth of pure desperation. And then you face the final taboo. In a profound act of despair, you will eat your seed grain, the precious kernels of corn or wheat that you had painstakingly saved from a previous better year, the seeds that you had protected from the locusts, the very symbol of your hope for the spring and for the future, are sacrificed for a single present meal. Eating your seed grain is an admission of utter defeat. It is a mortgaging of your entire future for a few more days of survival. As you watch your children eat the small, hard cakes made from the last of your hope, a part of you dies. The physical effects of this prolonged malnutrition are severe and degrading. You feel a constant, gnawing hunger, a dull ache in your stomach that never leaves you, day or night. You become weak, lethargic, your movements slow and deliberate as your body tries to conserve every calorie. A simple task like chopping wood leaves you breathless and dizzy. Your body begins to consume itself. The fat reserves are the first to go. Then the muscles wither away. You become emaciated, a walking skeleton, your skin stretched tight and pale over your bones. Your immune system collapses. You become incredibly susceptible to disease. A simple cold, which you would have shaken off in a few days, can now turn into fatal pneumonia. Your gums bleed and your teeth loosen from scurvy. Sores refuse to heal. The psychological toll is just as devastating. Your world shrinks until it contains only a single, obsessive thought: food. You dream of feasting, of hot bread, roasted meat, and pies overflowing with fruit. Dreams so vivid and so real that you weep with despair upon waking to the cold, hungry reality of the soddy. The constant hunger makes you irritable, angry. The slightest annoyance sparks into rage. The sound of a child crying from hunger, a thin, persistent, hopeless wail, is a sound that will haunt you for the rest of your life. Families were forced to make impossible, soul-destroying choices. Who would get the last piece of bread? The children, always. But which child? The strongest, who had the best chance of survival, or the weakest, who needed it most? These are calculations no parent should ever have to make. Some families were forced to abandon their claims in the middle of winter, a desperate, often fatal journey to the nearest town or fort, begging for charity from strangers who had little to give. Some simply gave up, staying in their cold, empty cabins, huddling together for warmth under thin blankets, and waiting for the end. The starving winter was the great filter of the frontier. It was the ultimate test of a settler's endurance and will to live. It was a brutal, recurring chapter in the story of Western settlement, a chapter that is almost entirely absent from the triumphant myths of taming the land. It was a reminder that the land was not always a garden, and that sometimes the price of the American dream was starvation. The isolated target, robbery on the homestead. We now turn from the great, impersonal, and elemental threats of plague and famine to a more intimate, and in some ways, more terrifying danger, the human predator. The Hollywood outlaw, a figure of myth and legend, robs fortified banks and heavily guarded trains, engaging in acts of daring spectacle. The real frontier criminal, however, was often a much more pathetic, desperate, and therefore more dangerous creature. He was a man stripped of hope and prospects, a transient ghost haunting the lonely spaces between settlements, and he preyed not on the powerful, but on the weak, the isolated, and the vulnerable. And in the vast, sparsely populated expanse of the American West, there was no one more isolated and more vulnerable than a family on a remote homestead. Imagine you are Sarah, the homesteader's wife we have met before. You have survived the back-breaking labor of building a home from the earth, the heartbreak of drought, and the waking nightmare of the locust swarm. You have endured a starving winter, your body and spirit pushed to the absolute limit. It is now autumn. Your husband, Thomas, having managed a small but precious harvest, has gone to the nearest town for supplies, salt, flour, perhaps a new blade for the plough. The town is a 2-day journey each way. With the travel and the time needed to conduct his business, he will be gone for the better of a week. For that week, you are alone with your 2 small children in your sod house on the prairie. Your nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, an impossible distance to cross for help, especially with young children in tow. The landscape that surrounds you is a vast, empty ocean of grass, its beauty completely eclipsed by its profound indifference. The silence is broken only by the ceaseless, nerve-shredding whisper of the wind. You are the sole guardian of your family, your home, and your future. You are utterly, completely alone. The sun is setting, painting the immense sky in hues of orange and purple. The beauty brings no comfort, only a sense of encroaching darkness and vulnerability. You are inside the dim, smoky interior of the soddy, preparing your meager evening meal of corn, mush, and bacon. You hear a sound outside. Your senses, honed by months of isolation and vigilance, are instantly on high alert. It is not the familiar, welcome sound of Thomas's wagon, the creak of the wheels and the lowing of the oxen. It is the sound of a single horse, its hoofbeats unnervingly close. Your heart begins to pound in your chest, a frantic drum against your ribs. You quiet the children and move cautiously to the small, greased paper window. Peering through the translucent covering, you see a man, a stranger, dismounting. He is gaunt, his clothes little more than rags hanging from a skeletal frame. His face is covered in a dirty, matted beard, and he has a look in his eyes you have learned to fear, a hollowed-out mixture of desperation and menace. And he is armed. A pistol is tucked into his waistband, its presence a stark and brutal fact. He walks toward your flimsy wooden door. This is the moment you have dreaded every day and every night that Thomas has been away. This is the story whispered between women at the rare community gathering, the source of constant, gnawing fear. The tramp or drifter, often a man who had failed at homesteading or mining, or who was on the run from the law back east, was a common feature of the landscape. Most were just looking for a handout, a meal and a place to sleep in the barn before moving on. But some were dangerous. They were men with nothing left to lose, men for whom the rules of society no longer applied. They saw an isolated homestead, particularly one occupied only by a woman and children, as an easy, defenseless target. He knocks on the door. The sound is unnaturally loud in the quiet of the evening. Your mind races, cycling through a terrifying calculus of risk. You have a shotgun, an old, heavy, double-barreled piece that Thomas keeps for hunting. It is propped in the corner, but it is heavy and awkward, and you are not skilled in its use. The kick is brutal, and you know that in the high-stress terror of the moment, your aim would be uncertain. What do? Do you open the door and face him? Do you pretend you are not home, praying he will assume the cabin is empty and move on? He knocks again, louder this time, more insistent, an angry, demanding sound. The crime you fear is not a dramatic robbery for a hidden fortune. You have no fortune. Your worldly wealth consists of a few sacks of flour, some cured bacon hanging from the rafters, perhaps a few dollars hidden away in a tin can buried under a floorboard. The crime is often one of petty theft and intimidation, but for a family living on the absolute margin of survival, there is no such thing as petty theft. The man might demand food, and you would give it to him, your hands trembling as you ladle stew into a bowl, hoping it will be enough. He might steal your husband's precious tools, the axe, the saw, the hammer, items that are irreplaceable and essential for your survival. He might steal your chickens, your only source of fresh eggs. Or, most devastatingly, he might steal your horse or your oxen, leaving your family stranded, unable to work the land, unable to fetch water, unable to go for help. A stolen animal could mean the end of your homestead, the failure of your entire dream. And there was always the threat of much, much worse. The threat of physical violence, of assault, was a constant, unspoken terror for women alone on the frontier. The law was days away. There was no one to call, no one to hear you scream. You were entirely on your own. Your survival, and the survival of your children, depended entirely on your wits, your courage, and your luck in this terrible lottery. You have a few seconds to decide. You might try to bluff. You pull the children close, put a finger to their lips, and call out in a voice you hope sounds steady. "John, get the rifle. There's someone at the door." You pray the stranger believes your husband is inside, that the risk of confrontation is too high. Or you might choose compliance. You open the door a crack, keeping your body behind it, and speak to him, trying to gauge his intent, ready to hand over whatever food you have in the desperate hope that he will be satisfied and move on, melting back into the darkness from which he came. Or you might have to make the terrible, final decision to use the shotgun. You imagine lifting its weight, the cold feel of the stock against your shoulder, the immense difficulty of cocking both hammers with trembling hands. You know that if you miss, or if you only wound him, you will have made the situation infinitely, horrifyingly worse. An injured, enraged man would be unstoppable. The decision to pull the trigger is a decision to kill, and the weight of that choice is immense. But the weight of not pulling it, of what might happen to you and your children if you don't, is even heavier. This constant fear of the human predator shaped the social customs of the frontier. While hospitality to strangers was a strong and necessary tradition in such a vast land, there was also a deep-seated and well-founded suspicion. A complex etiquette developed. A man riding up to an isolated cabin would often stop a good distance away, perhaps 100 yards, and call out a greeting, "Hello, the house," waiting for an invitation to approach closer. This was a crucial signal, a way to show that his intentions were peaceful, that he was not a threat. To ride directly up to a cabin unannounced was an act of aggression, a violation of an unwritten but vital code. The great, dramatic robberies of the myth, the bank heists, the train hold-ups, were a remote and abstract danger for most settlers. They were stories read in the newspaper, tales of a different world. This kind of quiet, personal, and terrifying encounter on an isolated farm was a much more common and visceral reality. It was a recurring nightmare that haunted the daylight hours and sleepless nights of countless women. It was a stark reminder that the dangers of the West were not just the grand, impersonal forces of nature, but also the small, desperate, and unpredictable cruelties of other human beings. A family could survive the drought, the blizzards, and the locusts, only to have their lives shattered by a single, hungry, desperate man with a gun.